Welcome back to Simply Scratch Kitchen. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and we are about to head into the grocery store because we are starting a brand new challenge, and we're going to be doing $5 dinners at every grocery store in my area, so that regardless of where you live or what stores you have access to, you can hopefully replicate these meals on a budget. If you've checked out some of my extreme budget videos, especially from the Dollar Tree, we're going to change a few things up for this series. So those videos often involve a lot of prepackaged processed foods, and sometimes that's absolutely necessary to do in order to get to payday. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to assume that you're just making regular meals for your family and that you might have a few pantry staples on hand, maybe a little milk, a scoop of flour, or some butter. And so we're going to use that to round out these meals, because most of the time when we go to the grocery store, we're just looking for the big ingredients in our meal, but we still have a little bit stocked in our pantry. We're not going to use pantry items as the bulk of our meals by any means, so I'm going to plan these meals assuming that you have a few things in your pantry. The reason I'm doing this is that I want to get back to making a few meals from scratch, because the more processed stuff we buy, even if it's really cheap, it does tend to add up and actually be more expensive than making it yourself. In addition, obviously these extreme budget meals are not used forever. We don't want to use them for long stretches of time, or we may start to develop some nutritional deficiencies. So I'm going to show you how we can make these items from scratch on a really small budget, and you're going to get probably a lot more food out of them as well. So that's what I'm hoping to do with this challenge. We're starting at Kroger today, and if you don't have a Kroger in your area, you probably have one of their sister stores like a Fred Meyer or a Safeway. So my hope is that you will be able to replicate this if Kroger is the type of store that you like to shop at. We're going to check out some of the deals that they have, because that's one way to make shopping at an expensive grocery store a little bit more affordable. So we're going to head on in and see what they have. For these more expensive stores, I always check the sale ad to see if there's anything good for the week, and I did check the meat section first just to see if there was any clearance, but everything, even the ground turkey, was $5 or over, so I didn't find anything good there. The ground beef was a little bit on sale, but it was a huge package. But then I lucked out and found these clearance out rotisserie chickens, and these were actually quite large, so I grabbed one. I was still trying to decide what direction to go with this chicken, and so I went to potatoes. I thought that would be a good filler, and the russets were definitely the cheapest, so I decided to go with a chicken stew. So I went over and got a single carrot, and that did not weigh very much. Although when we get to checkout, you will see that they ring up a little bit differently. I did go back and get one of those potatoes as well, and that came out to a little bit less than a pound. One perk of grocery stores like this is that you can get exactly what you need. So I got a handful of green beans and then 1 ear of corn, though that corn was really not a great price. But the beans were pretty light, and I went ahead and got 1 ear of corn as well. And I thought this would be right about $5, but you're going to see how it actually rung up. My grand total for all these items ended up coming to $5.83. The scale at the self-checkout was definitely a little different than the ones in the back, but you can obviously change the weights on those items if you need to stick really close to $5. The first thing I'm doing to make this soup is I'm boiling the chicken bones. So I just took all of the meat off, and there was a ton of meat. It was a really great value for how much meat we got. And so I'm just going to cover these bones with water and simmered these for a couple hours. This meal ended up working out perfectly, because the day I made this, I ended up coming down with something that made me quite sick, which is why my voice sounds like this, and is why some of this footage is a little funky. I was just really off my tripod game today, so you're gonna have these really interesting angles, but I think you can at least see what I'm doing here. I'm just chopping my carrots into little bite-sized pieces. And you'll notice, because this is real life, my kitchen is not immaculate today either. I was kind of fighting for my life trying to get this soup made so that we had something to eat, but it was actually very worth it in the end. You'll see how much it made, and it kept me nourished for a couple days to come. After my broth boiled for several hours, you can obviously leave the bones in for as long as you want, but I went ahead and took them out and got my carrots in the pot. I added all these vegetables at the same time. I chopped my potatoes into pretty small pieces. You can do whatever you want, but I was wanting to eat sooner rather than later, so I did smaller chunks. Even though I've made homemade broth hundreds of times, I continue to be amazed by how magical homemade bone broth is. It is so healing, and there's just a flavor to it that you cannot get out of a carton. And I think maybe some of it is because you know you're getting your money's worth out of that rotisserie chicken. It was really good. It added so much flavor to the soup without needing to even add anything else to it. With these green beans, you can obviously just snap them, but because I didn't have a ton of them, I wanted to go ahead and chop them into pretty small pieces, and really my kids like this better, but you do whatever you want. Just remember you're using these raw veggies. If you're used to using a frozen or canned version, you're going to need to cook these more than you would those. That's why I'm adding all these veggies at the same time. And that reminds me, if you do need to get this down closer to exactly $5, just check on your freezer options, because that probably would have come out a little bit cheaper than buying the green beans and the corn and the carrots separately. If the scales had been the same, this would have probably been a better deal. But if your prices aren't great where you're at, definitely check the frozen section. I just thought that the fresh really added something to the soup. It was very flavorful, and obviously fresh is just the most nutrient dense. Lastly, I'm going to cut all this corn off my cob. And on one of my last videos, someone recommended cutting the corn on the cob on the top of a bundt pan or like an angel food cake pan, and that will keep all these pieces from flying away. I should definitely try that, but for whatever reason, I don't have either of those pans. So I definitely think I need to get one of those, even if it's just to keep my corn on the cob from making a mess, because this is the second time I've made a mess with my corn. I got all of these veggies added to the boiling broth, and this had already filled out quite a lot without even adding our chicken back in yet. I did quite a bit of salt because remember, we made this broth from scratch. It is not salty. None of our vegetables were salted from the can, so you're going to need a lot more salt than you think you do. Obviously pepper, and then I'm going to use some thyme. I like adding thyme to anything I have chicken and chicken broth in. And then I also did some garlic salt and a little bit of onion powder. If you have those fresh, you're welcome to use that as well. I'm just trying to stick with the pantry staples for this video. I brought this to a rolling boil and covered it just to make sure we don't evaporate all of the liquid from that broth. And then I let it cook for about 20 to 25 minutes until the veggies were soft. Obviously, I already pulled the chicken off the bones earlier and just put that back in the fridge while the broth was cooking. So I just shredded that up even finer and added it to the pot once the veggies were already cooked. Since obviously this chicken is already cooked and didn't want to, overcook it. This was a ton of chicken, like I said, and made this really hearty and thick. I think one of the things with chicken vegetable soup is sometimes it can be a little bit light and not as filling. And so I added a splash of milk as well. You're welcome to not do this if you don't have milk. It will still be very flavorful. I just think that little taste of cream really adds something. And then it needed more salt, so I went in with some seasoned salt just for a little extra flavor, and this was the perfect touch. I let this simmer for 5 more minutes to get that chicken heated all the way through. And when I reheated this a couple days later, you can see all of that amazing chicken fat. This broth was really delicious. I hope this video gives you some encouragement that even if you have an expensive grocery store and a very tight budget, you can still make something really nourishing that you can feel really good about feeding to your family. If you like these videos, be sure to subscribe because we're doing a whole series so you can make really inexpensive meals from any grocery store that you have. I'll see you next time.